live in Central Europe and I live in a small house with my parents. The house has a driveway which is separated from the street by a huge gate that has electrical remote but it can be opened by key as well. This may not seem relevant, but trust me, it is. Not that I live in a dangerous area, but there was and still is a fairly large problem with gypsies, as most of them just don't seem to want to fit into normal society. For example, a few of them once attacked and tried to rob my brother because they saw him buying something in the street market and knew he had money on him. Fortunately, he was cautious and strong enough to fight them off. Anyway, I usually spend my evenings with my boyfriend, either at his house or mine. The evening of this event, I took the bus to my village from his and got off, just as usual. It was around 9 p.m, so it was pretty dark by this point. To get to my house, I have to walk up a few stairs from the bus stop, then turn left, walk for a bit, cross a different street, and walk down a hill. The whole way from the bus to my house takes about 5 minutes. So I walk down the stairs and turn to the left where there are some trash containers. As I walk by them, I look to my left and see a gypsy man going through the garbage. We instantly lock eyes and he makes this crazy grin and kind of stops in the middle of his job. I walk away, not looking back, until I hear glass breaking. He stood up and as I glared back, he grinned once again and started to walk towards me. I quicken my pace and cross the street. As I start going down the hill, I hear his footsteps getting louder and louder as he's getting closer. I'm about to cry at this moment, but I hold it in. I take up my phone and text my boyfriend. If I send you a heart emoji, call the fucking cops to my address. The heart emoji is one that I had set as our main emoji in the messenger. He starts freaking out and calls me several times, and I never pick up. Looking back, I should have because it might have scared the man off. I almost see my house and start to feel a bit relieved, but then I realize the fucking gate. I only have two options. One, open it with a key, or two, ring the house bell and hope for the best. I try searching small pockets of my bag, but keys are nowhere to be found. I decided to look back for a second and find the man just a few meters behind me now. And he's not grinning anymore. He seems more angry. I finally reach the gate and ring the bell just about 10,000 times when my father finally opens the main door and asks me,
"Where have you been so long?"
in a funny, ironic way. I'm there, still behind the gate, but the man is just about 2 meters away now. I scream, "Open! What the fuck is wrong with you?" And I start to cry. He sighs for a sec, but then probably realizes what is wrong and pushes the remote so quick that I don't even notice. The gate starts opening just as the man passes by. I'm crying, but trying not to let the man know. I push myself through the gap between the gate and the fence. I finally feel safe. Until I hear a faint whisper I'll never forget.
"You better run next time."
I collapse at the door. Dad tries to follow the guy, but he stands no chance because the man is long gone. We didn't call the cops since I didn't remember the man that much, and I wouldn't be able to give them a description, and it would have been no help. Ever since that event, I'm afraid of walking in the dark and paranoid of someone watching me. I know my fear is unfounded, but I have no way of getting rid of it. And I don't know if I actually want to, because it makes me aware of my surroundings even more.
Number 9.
I work in retail. The store I work at isn't the best in the neighborhood, and we're open until 10. After around 9, every employee except the cashier is usually helping to do the nightly closing things, so they're not on the floor. This is when my store was a lot slower, so we didn't generally have any customers after 9. I was stationed at the register at the time, and I was 16 years old. Around 9:30, a customer came into the store. I did my usual thing and greeted him, asking if he needed any help. He was really tall. I remember around 6'2", which was intimidating because I'm only 5'1", and had a huge scar across his face. I had a really bad feeling about him, but I can't really refuse to help customers just because they look seedy, so I ignored it. He kind of smiled at me and looked me up and down before asking where our clearance section was. Clearance was located all the way in the back of the store on a weird end cap. I've had plenty of customers get lost on their way there, so I told him I'd show him. While we were walking to the back of the store, he didn't keep a normal distance. I didn't realize how close he actually was until he hissed, "Hey girl, you know, you've got a really nice ass," in my ear. I didn't say anything because I'd never had a customer be that blunt with me before, and just walked a little bit faster to clearance, pretending like I hadn't heard him. When I got there, I turned around and he was closer than I expected. He smiled, but it just didn't look right. "Are there any cameras here?" I had such a bad feeling at this point, and I knew every other employee was in back counting the money. There were no cameras where we were in the back, but there was a fake security camera bubble near us, so I pointed to it. In a shaky voice, I said, "Yeah, there are a few." His face fell. He looked pissed. I wordlessly walked back to my counter, keeping an eye on him so he couldn't sneak up on me. Finally, he came back up front. He didn't buy anything, but slid across the counter to whisper to me, "Are there any cameras up here, sweetheart? Would anyone be able to see if I did anything to you right now?" I looked above us at the actual security cameras and, a little too desperately, said, "Yes, we have a monitored system. There are cameras right there." He looked a little angry again, but shook his head and didn't move further away. "Fine," he growled. "How about I come back some other time then and find you where there are no cameras? Then you'll see what I do to you." I was terrified because I didn't have a car yet and sometimes had to wait for my ride for a few minutes outside after we closed. Our lock cameras suck, so I knew that if he waited, there was a good chance he actually could find me in a place with no cameras. I just gaped at him, and he eventually walked out, looking smug. I called my manager, begging him or one of the floor employees to come and sit with me until the store closed, which he refused, so I was left alone for the last 15 minutes. The store closed normally, and no one was waiting outside, thank God. I made sure to tell some co-workers about the incident in case something came of it, even though I was off for the 2 days after it happened. When I came back to work, another manager, one that I was better friends with, pulled me into the office and pulled up our cameras, showing me a video of the guy. "Hey, is this your dude?" he asked. I nodded, and he frowned. "He's come in the past 2 nights, looking around the store for you." I didn't even know what to say. Being threatened was one thing, but knowing that he was actually looking for me was another. Thankfully, management made sure not to leave me alone after that, and the dude never actually came in again. I still work at the same store as a manager now. Nothing much phases me anymore because loads of weird shit happens in retail, but I do wish I knew whether he was trying to scare the shit out of me or if he was actually trying to plan something.
Number 8.
To give a little background, I'm a man. This takes place in the mid-90s and I'm about 7 years old. When I was a kid, I was raised by my grandmother. She would watch all of us, my sister, my 2 other cousins, and a few neighborhood kids. I was the oldest, my sister was a year younger, and my 2 other cousins were either 4 or 5. We would spend most of our time outside, as my grandmother was beginning to get older and would spend most of her days inside. We would make up plays to keep ourselves entertained, and we would practice our plays every day in my grandmother's garage and would use her automatic door as a curtain for our stage. Now, we lived in an urban neighborhood, and it was not uncommon for people to be out any time of the day, children to be playing, and cars to be parked all over. This particular day, though, I had noticed a burgundy van circling around our street before eventually parking in the alley where the garage door would open. I thought nothing of it, as, like I said, it would be strange for a car to get lost before settling in the alley. We closed the garage door in order to take a water break. After a few minutes, I made the decision that we were ready again and opened the garage door. The van was now idling right in front of us, the exhaust guzzling as black smoke passed our faces. After sitting in park for what seemed like forever, an older man got out of the van and approached us. He said we were all terrific actors and that he would like to watch us rehearse. I felt a little sketchy about the man, but always wanting an audience, I told him that it was okay. The man took a particular interest in my sister, who had a dance routine in our make-believe play. I remember what he said about her vividly, like he whispered it in my ear yesterday. The man gazed at my sister and said,
I like the way you dance. Will you come with me and dance for me?
Immediately, as the oldest of the kids, I felt uneasy and thought about the trouble I would get in if someone caught us talking to a stranger. It was a tight-knit community where most of the neighbors knew of us, as my family had been living here for many years. At this time, the man swung open the 2 doors in the back of the van. The van was vacant of seats. I had never seen this specific model of van, but even at my young age, I could tell that the seats had been removed. The man smiled creepily at my sister and told her that her shoe was untied, and if she sat on the floor in the van, he would tie it for her. My sister, being a bit naive, hopped up on the step of his vehicle and kicked her leg out. The man began to tie her shoe and told all of us that he had an audience that would love to see our play. We would just all have to get in the back and right up the road to where the stage was located. I was tempted to go with the man because I was always up for an adventure, and staying inside at my grandmother's house was not my idea of a good time. While I was still thinking it over, I noticed the man begin to lift my sister up and put her deeper into the van. Not in an aggressive way, but in a way that was similar to someone picking a toddler up from a high chair. I knew something was wrong, and I began to say that we had to go, but my feet were frozen by fear. I couldn't move. I'm starting to panic when all of a sudden I see my dad driving up from the opposite side of the alley to park in the empty lot next door that all my family was accustomed to parking in. He must have gotten off of work early today. He screeches to a halt. Without even taking the keys out of the ignition, jumps out of the car and begins running towards the van after seeing my sister sitting inside. My sister, visibly shaken from the look on my dad's face, begins crying and runs towards him. He guides her towards my cousin and me, and we quickly take her into our arms. The creepy man's eyes widen like he had seen a ghost, and he runs around the van into the driver's seat and drives away, rear door still open, shaking violently. My dad, who I should let you know is a sheriff in the county, draws his weapon and begins running after the van on foot. He kept up for about 2 blocks before the van hit a left and disappeared, going the opposite way to a one-way. My dad comes back to make sure everyone is okay, and all 4 of us are crying. My grandmother comes out to see what is going on and is in disbelief that she let this happen under her watch. I overheard one neighbor saying he had seen the van riding down the street earlier in the week after hearing my dad describe it. This was the one and only time I'd ever seen my dad cry, probably because he knew just how close he was to losing his only daughter. I never saw the van again. To this day, I still think about what would have happened if we all stepped into the van, or if my dad wouldn't have had an early day. As for the man, I'm guessing that he either got arrested, fled the state, or got what was coming to him. The worst scenario that I can think of is that he got some little girl to dance with him. I'm just glad that it wasn't my sister. Number 7. So at the time of this story, I was 18. I'd had a rough past but just got my life on track. I moved out and got my own place. Everything was going great, so I decided to get a roommate, seeing as I didn't want to get lonely at my new home. As soon as I got the chance, I put it out in the papers looking for a person to live with me. A few days later, I got a call. I answered the phone and a light, friendly voice called from the other side. It was a female voice.
Hello, my name is Lucy. I'm calling on behalf of your ad. I'm looking for a roommate and thought that you would be perfect. You're not too far from me.
The female voice said delightedly. We set a date to meet up. We were to meet up the next day at a local cafe. I didn't want to go anywhere private after hearing all the stories about roommates meeting and not being who they thought they were, etc. The next day came by, we met up, got to know each other, and everything went fine. She was a tall, petite blonde with bright blue eyes. She didn't wear too much makeup and she looked really healthy, and we got along really well. We had so many things in common, such as music taste in books and films, and we played near enough the same video games. We became friends, and as soon as possible, she moved into my place with me. I finally had a roommate. The first few months were great, pizza nights, movie nights, etc. I'd have gladly considered her a best friend of mine, and we got very close. But after a few months, things changed. She got more distant, more and more. She also got a bit weird. Just little things at first, such as losing her temper at nothing. She'd get up in the night and walk up and down the hallway, but things got worse. One night, I will never forget. It was 2010, August 5th, 6 years ago. I woke up at 2 a.m. and I heard banging. I knew it was her, so I wasn't too worried. She would slam the cupboard door shut over and over for about half an hour, nearly every night. I'd go and see if she was okay, and she just kept going, looking me right in the eyes as she did so, with a bone-chilling look on her face, eyes wide, lips parted, head tilted. This particular night, I didn't get up. I sighed and put my head under my pillow, but I heard quiet sobs. It made my heart break to hear it, but I didn't get up. All of a sudden, I hear pounding footsteps running to my room. They were so fucking loud. I shot up as she stormed into my room with an angered expression. What the fuck was going on, I thought. She collapsed to her knees and started hysterically laughing, just staring at me with the same widened eyes and tilted head, but this time a really loud laugh. I called her, but she just kept laughing. I got up slowly, walking over to her. I crouched beside her and she stopped laughing. I asked if she was okay. She got up and said goodnight, leaving my room. The way she said goodnight, though, sent chills down my spine. I got back into bed, but as soon as I did, she started to scream outside my door, a high-pitched, terrifying shriek. Of course, I checked to see if she was okay, and she was. She just stood there, fucking shrieking. Suddenly she stopped and she started to giggle, a very childlike giggle. She pulled out a fucking knife from her back pocket. She ran at me, but I pushed her away and ran back into my room, locking the door behind me. At this point, my heart was in my throat. She was hitting and banging on the door for about 10 minutes. She eventually gave up and I listened, her footsteps slowly walking away. Nothing else serious happened that night, except for faint laughing and the same banging of the cupboard door, but only louder. I managed to fall asleep, but I wish I never woke up. I got up the next morning, I showered, got ready and went downstairs to my kitchen. Lucy was dead. She was covered in her own blood, a knife next to her. She was dead. I called the police and an ambulance, and they arrived in a few minutes. I'll never forget it. She was mentally ill, she just couldn't take it, and she killed herself. I still live in that house, without a roommate. I still wake up around 2 a.m. every night, but I never hear the banging, the footsteps, or the laughter. It's eerily silent. Number 6. I work in a small family-owned pottery shop in the middle of a tourist trap town, also known as America's hometown. I've been working at this shop for close to 3 months. I only work weekends and most of the time I'm running the shop alone. My boss comes in sometimes for a few hours to throw some pieces together if he has a show coming up. But other than that, it's just me. The shop is small but cute. All the pottery is made in the back of the building and fired in the kiln, which is in the basement. I'm still fairly new, so I'm not familiar with all the terms that go on along with everything. But upon request, I'm obligated to give a customer a tour of the building. This is my first job where customer service is key. When customers come in, I give my best fake smile and warm, "Hey, how are you?" greeting. Most people make small talk, then carry on with their shopping. Business has been steady since I started. This time of the year, the town is usually crawling with tourists. Sunday was a bit different, slower than usual. An older woman came in and complained about prices, then left without buying anything. A man and his 2 kids came in looking for a gift for his wife. It was a quiet day. I had some downtime, so I decided to bring some of the finished pottery to the front and shelve it. A man came in shortly after and I was actually excited. Finally, someone to make conversation with. "Hi sir, how are you today?" He looked at me, but didn't say anything. He seemed out of place and distant. "Sir?" I asked, shyly. He was slowly making his way toward the back of the shop. He finally made eye contact with me, so I tried again to make conversation. "Would you like a tour? You seem interested." He cut me off mid-sentence.
He burns people back there, you know.
He said this very quietly. I was caught off guard. I had no idea how to reply to that. I'm sure my face said it all. I've never been good at controlling my facial expressions. It often got me in trouble. After a few uncomfortable seconds of silence, I was finally able to ask him what he was talking about. He stared at me for a minute and then warned me to never, ever go in the kiln room alone with my boss, and with no other explanation, he left. I'm not sure what to make of this. I enjoy my job and actually really like my boss. I haven't spent much time around him, but he always answers my questions without making me feel dumb, and he's just an all-round nice guy. Do I let some creepy customer get into my head, or do I forget about it and carry on like nothing happened?
Number 5.
So this happened in 2013. This kid named Ricky moved in next door to me when he was around 12. And for the lack of a better term, this kid was pretty much a pussy. I remember one time he fell on his skateboard and didn't land hard at all and was crying his little heart out in my driveway when he was like 16. So fast forward to when this kid is like 18. By then I'm selling coke and molly pretty heavily, and he's one of my best customers. By now he's hanging with some pretty shady people, which my parents obviously aren't fans of. My parents also didn't know that I was ever selling anything, because I was pretty good at keeping it under wraps. He went from the skater/emo type to some wannabe thug, which he just wasn't built for. So my parents go to the Outer Banks, North Carolina, every year for 2 weeks, and ask if I'll come stay at the house while they're gone, which I was excited about, because their house is much better than the shitty little one-bedroom apartment that I had at the time. So everything was going fine at the house. I had my on and off again girlfriend over all the time, and there was quite a bit of drugs and alcohol going on. I was far from a saint back then. I'll never forget it though. It was a Thursday night. My girlfriend had left hours ago. I should say, earlier that day, Ricky had seen me at the front of my parents and had asked for a front. I told him no, considering I never fronted anyone, and in all honesty, had been using too much of my own shit, so couldn't afford it too. He didn't like that very much, and we got in an argument, and I pretty much punked him in front of all of his little friends. So by now it's like 2 in the morning, and I'm obviously nowhere near tired because of all the coke and molly. I'm sitting in the dark watching Netflix in this den or side living room my parents had. It was in the downstairs, which had a window going outside, which I had open. I had paused the TV and was on my phone texting and on Facebook when I hear something. It's the screen of my window slowly being slid up. I know the sound. I had snuck in and out of this house numerous times growing up. So I slowly get up and watch the window. I clearly see the screen moving very slowly up through the curtains. So I walk up to the window, and as soon as I move the curtain, at least 3 or 4 people scatter. I run out front, but they're booking it down the street. I knew it was that Ricky kid and his friends. I didn't see them, but I knew it was those shitheads. I didn't call the cops or anything because I wasn't exactly living on the right side of the law either. So I just go back in and lock everything up, and the rest of the week goes smoothly. I never told my parents about it, and I also never saw Ricky again. I called him a few times, but he never answered. I even offered to front him, which was bullshit because I just wanted to see him. But he didn't reply, which was all the more reason to know that it was him, and he knew that I knew. So, like a month goes by and I'm watching the news, and Ricky is on it for murder. He and 3 of his friends went out of town and broke into some old couple's home, beat them, tied them up, and then stabbed them. Then they burnt the house down after robbing it. They all ended up telling on each other, and he got sentenced to 35 years for testifying against his co-defendants. It sure makes me wonder if I was asleep when they got in, what could have happened.
Number 4.
To give some background information, this event occurred a little over a year ago, and I still haven't been able to even begin to get over it. I'm a 22-year-old 5'4" female, and at the time, I was 21. My family and I had recently moved to a new town that was a fair amount more rural than the town I had previously lived in, and our new house was a large ranch-style house with a basement. I was home from college and my parents had left the week to celebrate their wedding anniversary with their friends who lived several hours away. Before I continue, I'll give a quick layout of the house so that you'll be able to imagine the setting a bit more clearly. There were 3 doors which led into the house. One on the front porch, a sliding glass door on the back porch, which did have a lock and floor-length curtains for privacy, and another door on the other side of the wall from my bedroom, which led into the garage and basement. When you walk out of my bedroom and turn, you'll see all the way across the house, a kitchen, living room, dining area, to the door of my parents' bedroom and the stairs leading up from the basement. It had been a few days since my parents left and I hadn't had any problems. They had sent me a couple of messages on Facebook letting me know that they had arrived at their friend's house safely and were having a good time. The day had gone well and I was sure to check that I'd locked all the doors of the house once the sun started to go down. It was 11 p.m. and I was doing my nightly routine of laying in bed and messing around on the computer when I suddenly got this sinking feeling of dread. I felt as if I was being watched. It was summer and we didn't have AC, so I had a large box fan in my window blowing the cool night air into my stifling hot room. But once that feeling settled over me, I decided that I should remove the fan and close the window, just in case. Once removing the fan, shutting and locking the window and pulling down the curtain, I felt a bit better. However, I still couldn't shake the feeling of dread. I lay back in bed and tried to continue what I was doing, though I didn't put my headphones back on. After a few minutes, I began to hear something that sounded like light scratching. I sat still in bed, listening to the sound, trying to pinpoint what it was and if I recognized it at all. Our new house, although relatively close in distance to our neighbors, had a fair amount of forest around it. So, I thought the scratching may have been an animal or someone's dog that got loose and wanted to come inside. After a few minutes, the scratching stopped and everything returned to silence. So I figured that I was probably right and that it must have been an animal. My relief was short-lived, as soon after the scratching stopped, from the other side of the wall, I began to hear slow footsteps descending into the basement. This is when I knew that I was completely fucked. There was no way I could get out of the house without walking past the basement stairs. We didn't have a house phone, and at the time, I was in the process of getting a new cell phone because mine was broken beyond repair. I sat there for a few seconds, wondering what the hell I should do. I knew that I would need to get out of the house as soon as possible, and that the more time I wasted, the worse it would be for me. I contemplated popping the screen out of my bedroom window and jumping out, but it was far enough off of the ground that there was a good chance I would end up getting hurt if I did. Not to mention that if I jumped out of the window and hurt myself, I wouldn't be able to run for help, and I would be right next to the door that whoever was in my house had gone in through. So, I decided to very carefully and quietly open my door and peek out around the corner, and if the coast was clear, I would make a mad dash for the front door and sprint to my neighbor's house. I very slowly opened my bedroom door, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness of the house before creeping around the corner and looking to see if I was safe to make a run for it. What I saw nearly made me vomit. As my eyes scanned the house, I noticed that something was off. I squinted hard as I looked over at the basement stairs and was able to make out the shape of a man. What made it worse? He wasn't standing at the top of the stairs. He was fucking crawling up them like some kind of nightmare creature. I quickly backed into my room again, shutting and locking the door as quietly as I could. I didn't think he'd seen me, but there was no way that I was going to make a run for it now. My only choice was to pop the screen and jump out the window. As I was unlocking and opening my window, I heard the handle to my bedroom door turn. Once the man realized that it was locked, in a sickeningly sweet, sing-song voice, he cooed,
"I know you're in there."
This was followed by a loud cackle, and what I can only imagine was him throwing himself at full force against my door. I ripped the screen out of the window and flung myself out. I landed wrong on my right foot, and I was sure that I'd hurt my ankle. But at the time, I couldn't think of anything other than getting away as far as possible. I got up and ran as fast as I could to my neighbor's house, knocking on their door in a panicked frenzy. I looked over at my house as I was yelling for my neighbors to let me in, and I swear to fucking God, I could see the man standing at my window, waving at me. My neighbors finally opened the door after what felt like forever, and I managed to explain well enough what was going on for them to let me in and call the police. I stayed with them until the police arrived. The police searched my house and found that the lock to the basement had been picked, and that the door to my bedroom was hanging off of the hinges. They weren't able to find the man anywhere, and because I had only seen him for a split second in the dark, I couldn't provide them with a good description of him. Of course, I got into contact with my parents immediately and they hurried home. The police took my statement and searched the area for the man, but of course, they came up with nothing. After this event, my parents and I were sure to add deadbolt locks to the door leading into the basement and to the door leading out of the basement to the rest of the house. They also helped me pay to get my new phone. What really bothers me about all of this is that nothing was stolen. There wasn't even any evidence that the guy had looked through anything while he'd been in my house.
Number 3.
Why it started, I'm not sure. I'm going to share a true horrifying encounter with a man that stalked me relentlessly for 10 years of my life. I'm an 18-year-old girl and had just graduated high school about a month prior. My best friend and I went to the lake and to our favorite beach. There was no camping or loading dock, just swimming and picnics. We were at the lake every chance we got. This day was just like every other lake outing. We get to our beach and had a pretty good parking spot. I locked everything in my car except my keys and towel, and my friend Bree did the same. We set our towels on the beach and placed my keys on the top of them and jumped in. At this time in my life, I had been stalked for 7 years. Oddly enough, I didn't know what the guy looked like. I'd only seen a glimpse of him once or twice, he did very well in the shadows. Bree and I swam around in the water, mainly chatting about our future, college and such. Bree asks me what is wrong, as apparently she saw me glancing around and not talking much anymore. I whispered, "He's here." She froze and asked, "Where?" I wasn't sure, but I could feel him watching me. I told her, "Let's start making our way up to the bank and meander out of here." I didn't want to bring any attention to us. As we slowly make our way closer to the bank, trying to make small talk, that's when I see him. I immediately knew it was him. I'm not sure how, but he was sitting back a ways on a picnic table, his eyes never leaving me. I spotted him and glanced away quickly, trying not to show I was bothered by it. I could feel a panic attack coming on though. Every couple of minutes, I glanced back at him. He'd still be looking at me, smiling a very unnerving, creepy smile. The next time I glanced back at him, his shirt was unbuttoned. We were a lot closer to the bank now. I peek over, and he is licking his lips, staring at me, and started rubbing his nipples. "What the fuck?" I whisper. We are about to get out of the water when he stands up. "Where's he going?" Bree whispers, rhetorically. He walks over to his car. It's parked right next to mine, even though the parking lot is just about empty. He gets in and backs up when I feel 1,000 pounds lifted off of me. I wish that it ended there, but it didn't. He wasn't leaving. He pulled his car out and teed it behind mine. I had no way out. Bree starts freaking out, which doesn't help me try to stay calm. "What do we do?" she says. I grab my towel and wrap it around me, grabbing my keys. He's out of his car, looking into my driver's side window. "What is he doing?" I whisper to myself. That's when I realized that I could see him through my windows, and he was jacking off on my car. "Follow me," I whisper to Bree. I yell, "Hey, how are you? It's been a while." Bree looks at me confused. She sees the large Mexican family just a ways down the beach. I wave and Bree follows suit. I walk into the middle of them and cry, "Help me please, do you have a phone?"
No comprendo."
A man says, looking at me confused. "Shit," I whisper. I try to remember Spanish class. Telefono, por favor." I beg in my best Spanish that I could muster.
"Lo siento, mi amigo."
He shrugs. "Gracias." I drop my head in defeat. When I risk a glance at my car, the man was back in his car and had moved it to the other side of mine. I could see him searching frantically for me as he lost me in the crowd. This was my time to try and get away. I ran across the service road, Bree hot on my heels, into the wooded area. We run through the wooded area back towards the parking area. He had walked back towards the beach and is walking away from the parking area, trying to see where I had gone. Sticks and rocks slice my feet and my toes as my flip-flops don't offer much protection. I saw his back to us, so I run across the parking lot to my car, hiding behind on the driver's side. Bree right behind me. There was cum all over my door and handle. I use my towel to open the door and Bree crawls in, keeping down, and I crawl in throwing my towel on the ground. When my car starts up, I see him turn back to me, looking angry and running towards me. I slam my car in reverse and peel out. Bree has my phone, calling 911, and is hysterical. She finally hands the phone to me. I tell the dispatcher what he was driving and his license plate number. She asks what I'm driving and tells me that she'll send someone out to check it out. About 7 minutes later, I see lights flying up behind me. The speed limit around the lake is 45. I notice that I'm driving 65. I pull over and the cop walks up to my car with his hand on his gun. "Brooke," he yells before getting to my window. I start thinking, how does he know my name? I'm crying hysterically, of course, not thinking clearly. He reaches my window and he says, "The dispatcher told me your name and your car description. You called 911, right? Can you please step out of the car?" He asks, still cautious. I get out and hug the officer. He was taken aback by this, but I was so thankful that I was safe. He takes Bree and I's statement, telling me that he will file it with my local law enforcement office to file with my case. He said, "Please slow it down, okay?" and sent us on our way. 3 days later, I go to our local police station. There was an officer there that I knew because we called 911 often. He greets me and asks me what I needed. I asked what was going on with my case. He scoffs and said, "What case?" Me a little bewildered, I say, my stalking case?" He said, "There isn't any investigation. There isn't a case." What? Why not? I'm being stalked. We can't prove it. He proceeds to tell me that he knows who the guy was, but he couldn't release the information to me. But I needed to carry mace or a gun to protect myself because the guy is bad news. What I can tell you is that he is a multiple sex offender in a bad way. I then exclaim, "See? Go arrest him. Why are you guys protecting him when I'm the victim?" "Look, stalking is a very hard crime to prove. I'm sorry, there just isn't anything we can do." "What is going to have to happen for you to catch this perv?" He is clearly irritated and says, "Look, I'm done. This conversation is over." I yell, "No, it's not. I want answers to why no one will help me." He says, "Look, I'm sorry, Brooke, but there's nothing we can do unless we catch him doing it. Until then, it's just a she said, he said thing." "Well, isn't that fucking great?" I stand up. "I guess he'll just have to hurt me before anyone cares." He nods his head. "Look, I'm sorry." A lump forms in my throat as I feel like I may puke. "Well, isn't that nice? You know that stalking is illegal in 50 states and for some fucked up reason, he is the one that is protected. Some justice, that is. Fuck this shit." I storm out. I feel like no one can protect me now. Number 2. I've lived in a rural part of Oregon in the woods, and I've lived here for quite some time. I'm much older now, but looking back, I suppose I never knew just how much danger I was in. Back in the day of jumping off of big rocks and smashing anthills, it wouldn't be uncommon to see the occasional hiker go by, then up the trail that goes behind my house. See, in Oregon, trails are everywhere and anywhere. But around my house, there were a lot of woods where you'd have to make a trail rather than walk preset trails. And frankly, the lack of anything but deer trails made it easy to get turned around in there. So as I said, a hiker goes by, says hi and carries on into the woods. But here's where it gets strange. This is only something that I noticed a few years after this, as I was a little bit older then. Not everyone that goes into that forest seems to come out. Of course, there is the excuse that they found another way out or set up a tent, That's all plausible. But when you see an elementary kid and her dog walk in and never come back, it sets this eerie feeling about the woods, especially as she was from down the road, and after that, I never actually saw her again. Now, on my behalf, yes, I've been in the woods many times. Yes, I've turned around from the lack of trail. And yes, I've been in there enough times to know where everything is. Luckily, there's landmarks. But maybe not in the way there should be. Take a note, I was a kid in elementary school when this specific adventure happened. But I remember going into the woods with my immediate neighbor. For privacy's sake, I'll call him George. One of these days, George and I thought that it would be totally rad to check out the forest. So we head in with the sun on our right shoulder to keep track of our direction. Going in, the canopy was as thick as a Kevlar blanket, and the darkness that ensued was bone-chilling, as was the cold air. But of course, why would two elementary boys care about the details? We wanted in on the adventure. So on we went, and it wasn't very long at all before we saw the first landmark. About 2 or 3 shredded camping tents lay in ruins, one still standing, and a few other camp-like items like tarps and sleeping bags were strewn across the site. We poked around and noticed that the standing tent had these deep slashes in the side, and the sleeping bag was still in the tent, along with rotten food and water canteens, etc. It almost seemed like whoever was here just up and left in one hell of a hurry. A little wary, but still curious, we set on. This is where the happy-go-lucky attitude turned into silent treading, eyes peeled and searching, and no words were exchanged. Why we kept going and didn't just stop and go back home, I'll never know. The second landmark, in a very small clearing of trees in a field of grass and tall bushes, we come across another tent. This was just a standalone tent, and unlike the previous campsite, it looked new. The zipper was zipped up, the tent was clean, and the grass around it seemed freshly laid down so as to make walking room. So respectfully, I called out to see if anyone was in the tent or around the area, but no one answered. Slowly, we crept up to the tent and looked around. We didn't hear anything inside either. I was ready to leave when George started unzipping the tent, and when he did, we peered inside to see nothing. Just a perfectly dry and clean set out sleeping bag, fresh food, water, neatly folded clothes, and a small bag of camping gear, including a lantern. George went into the tent and started rummaging around. I told his ass to get out of there and leave it alone because it was rude to rummage through other people's belongings. He made off with a piece of string after we made an agreement that he could not steal anything valuable. After about an hour of trees and bushes, trees and grass, it was getting late, so we thought we would wrap it up soon. Right before we started back, George spotted something in the trees, hidden behind a log and some tight-knit trees. We ran up to it to find another tent, this being the third and final landmark. The appearance seemed like it had been there for a while. It wasn't broken or torn, but sat there for some time. Of course, George wants to look inside, and after some useless banter, I agree. But I wish we had just left the woods altogether at the first sight. Inside was a sleeping bag, dry blankets, some pictures of people's faces taken from afar, some rope, and an axe. Seeing the axe unsettled me as a kid. For some reason, I had a feeling that axe wasn't just for chopping wood. George rummaged around a little and found a disposable camera. It was almost full. and as George was kneeling down, just kind of taking in the sight, there was an unknown, rotten smell. I was standing watch over him and our area, and this is when I started getting really uneasy and impatient. Something was wrong here. I told George we should leave, and without argument, he agreed, and solemnly, we set back. It was a ways back before we started hearing leaves fall. I'd look around and assume it was just that. But when it became rhythmic, I stopped and George followed suit. Hush now, we listened for a while, and unlike natural leaves falling, it was silent too. I looked at George and he had caught on. I could tell because his eyes were wide and neither of us were breathing. We give each other the universal, let's get the fuck out of here look, and pick up pace in what we hope is the right direction. But the leaf falls get much louder and faster too. I was too scared to look back, but George did, and when he did, on his lead, we just up and start running. Time passes and the memory is a blur from the adrenaline, but thankfully, after what seems like for hours, but was most likely minutes, we find ourselves out in a clearing. It wasn't our street or any form of civilization, but it was clear of trees. We both run out towards the middle and see power lines in the distance. Those power lines turn out to be the ones that run up to our houses. We briskly jog home and never say a word to our parents. I was too young to understand what was wrong, but old enough to know that we shouldn't be there. Looking back now, I can't believe that we made it back unscathed. Have I been back there? Years later, yes. Cops have been called on multiple times since then, but they never do anything. The second landmark tent had rotted and fallen by then. The stalker or creeper's tent is gone, along with all of its belongings, and the first landmark site is just more rotted than it was. Do I find new tents there? Sometimes, but now I know never to go near them and fear that it could be someone you don't want to cross paths with, or worse, the owner of whoever chased us all those years ago.
Number 1.
It was September of 2010. My boyfriend Dave, his best friend Tony, my best friend Liz and I were all coming back to our hometown for our final year of college after spending the summer in London. We'd had a fantastic time staying in my uncle's apartment, partying and exploring such a big city. It was great. We'd stopped in a B&B for the night, about halfway home, and were planning to get home at about 6 p.m. We all woke up early, about 4, maybe 5, ready to set off again, when we discovered that someone had obviously driven too close to our car and broken the right wing mirror off. Seeing as this was my dad's birthday present to me, and I'd had it barely 2 months, I was absolutely fuming. We asked the landlady where we could possibly find spares or something to use for the time being. She said she'd driven past a makeshift scrapyard or something a while back. She wasn't sure if it was still there, but she drew us a rough map and we got back on the road. I wasn't very sure she was right about her directions, because the closer we got to the area she'd circled it in, the more desolate the surroundings were. The roads got more difficult and had gone from stone to dirt. Around us there weren't any farms anymore, just long weedy grass and patches of forest. It had basically become a moor. We were about to head off because of the wild animals, and I'd just have to get over being a paranoid driver and deal without my wing mirror, when surely enough, my boyfriend pointed out in front to a handwritten sign directing us 2 miles down the road to cafe and car spares. We drove down into a little cove surrounded by forest and all got out, except for my friend Liz, who was asleep in the back seat. There was a tiny cream hut with cafe spray painted on the roof, a caravan, and a hill of metal and bits of cars. As to be expected, we were the only visitors parked up in front. The sun was up, but no lights or people were around. I guessed they were still sleeping. It was still about 6 anyway. We all walked up to the scrap pile and had a fumble through, looking for a wing mirror or any sort of mirror that could do for the time being until I could get it repaired. Tony picked up what could only be an at least decade-old mirror and suggested that we just take it and go. But me, being stupid sincere me, insisted that I have to give them some money for it. I can't just take it and go. I knocked on the door and waited. A big hard-faced man answered the door and at first looked pissed off and tired, then smiled to me, a two-toothed smile. He leered at me for a few seconds, then, seeing the boys approach, asked us what we wanted. Tony handed him the mirror and asked how much for it. He said nothing, just to get to know us, to which I thought fair enough. 2 more men then left the patio door on the other side. They turned and smiled, both skinheads with teeth like meth addicts, and came over. They really stank. He gave them the mirror and told them to go attach it to our car. He then introduced himself as Ian, sat us down on the patio chairs and offered us some sandwiches. I politely declined, but he insisted we must be hungry and told me to come in, that women are the best at making sandwiches. I declined again, finding him a little bit sexist at this point, and when he asked again, Dave, more sternly, reinforced that I said I don't want to come in. Ian muttered something and then came and sat on the chairs with us. It became awkward very quickly as he started asking questions. It started off innocently, like asking how old we were, where we were from, etc., and then became a little uncomfortable. He asked if I had a boyfriend, to which Dave answered, and then started asking both of us what we like to do to each other, how often we have intercourse, and weird private stuff like that, to which we didn't answer. We sat in silence until we heard Liz scream. When we turned around, I saw one of the men meant to be fixing the mirror with one hand in the back window, grasping Liz's leg. The other was looking around nervously behind the car. We got up immediately and sprinted off the patio, Tony running after the guys, but they both headed into the forest. Liz was hysterical. She'd woken up to find herself on her own in the car and a man's hand running up her leg. I can't even imagine how terrifying that must have felt. I got into the back seat with her and consoled her while Dave came around the other side to get in and told us that there were some nails on the floor. We looked over and there were about 12 of them arranged around the tire like the guy was ready to pop them. I couldn't really think why at the time, but now I wonder where they got all those car parts from. We decided it was enough. We didn't want to spend any more time there, mirror or no mirror, and we were ready to go when Tony was the last to get in the car. He closed the backseat door as we looked back and saw Ian re-emerge from the house with something long in his hands, running towards us. My vision adjusted when we got a bit closer, and then I realized that he was holding a rifle, a fucking hunting rifle. At that point, I actually burst into tears and hit the engine, slamming on the accelerator as hard as possible. The car started to go and we got up to about 90, forgetting the dirt roads and just driving over whatever until the scrapyard was out of sight. We didn't stop looking behind us until we were safely on the motorway, getting home. To this day, whenever I go to London, I take a train instead. I'm still terrified I'll meet them again.